Welcome to Story Time, where real stories unfold. Stories that shock, stories that inspire, and stories that stay with you long after they're told. If you enjoy real stories, make sure you subscribe, follow, and like. New stories drop 3 times a week. Now, let's get into today's story. Welcome to... They heard a rumor that Paul Bradley had money, maybe millions. And in October 2018, that rumor turned into one of the most horrifying crimes the Cleveland area had ever seen. A father, a 14-year-old daughter, taken from their home, tortured for hours, and left in a case so brutal that prosecutors pursued the death penalty against multiple suspects. In true crime, some cases begin with revenge. Some begin with jealousy. Some begin with anger. But this one appears to have started with something even more reckless: gossip. A rumor had been circulating that Paul Bradley had money. Not just a little money, but serious cash. Investigators later said stories were spreading that he had won and lost huge sums gambling at Jack Cleveland Casino. Court records later described player data showing that between 2016 and 2018, Paul had cashed in more than $5.3 million, while also sustaining very large losses. That kind of lifestyle, combined with what prosecutors described as talk about him being well off, helped create a deadly target on his back. Paul Bradley was 39 years old. In October 2018, he was at his Bedford, Ohio home with his 14-year-old daughter, Paris Bradley. Paris was still a child, a young teenager with her whole future ahead of her. People remembered her as bright, athletic, and kind. The kind of young person who should have been thinking about school, friends, and the next chapter of life, not becoming the victim of a crime that would shock an entire region. Sometime around 3:30 in the morning, several men forced their way into Paul's house. Police said the intruders believed money was hidden inside. They went in expecting to find cash. Instead, they found nothing. And that should have been the end of it. A failed robbery, a frantic search, a quick escape. But according to investigators and later court proceedings, that is not what happened. What happened next is what makes this case unforgettable. Paul and Paris were taken from the home. Prosecutors said they were forced out during the robbery and then subjected to a horrifying ordeal that stretched on for hours. Authorities described the case as one of the most heinous they had ever worked. And even years later, the language used in news records and court records still carries the same sense of disbelief. Not just that it happened, but that human beings were capable of doing this to a father and his daughter. According to investigators, the suspects were trying to force Paul to reveal where money might be hidden. The rumor had convinced them the cash had to exist somewhere. So instead of accepting they were wrong, they kept going, and going, and going. East Cleveland investigators said Paris was tortured in front of her father. Court and news reports state that she was eventually shot multiple times in the head. The brutality of that detail is hard to process on its own, but what makes it even more devastating is the image it leaves behind. A father powerless to protect his daughter, forced to witness the unthinkable, while the attackers still demanded answers about money that may never have been there to begin with. And somehow, even after that, it still was not over. Investigators said Paul Bradley, who had been bound, was beaten and then placed into a vehicle. That vehicle was driven to an abandoned lot off Savannah Avenue in East Cleveland and set on fire. Authorities said they believed Paul was burned alive. The medical findings later described blunt head trauma, thermal injury, and carbon monoxide asphyxia. Paris died from gunshot wounds to the head. Both deaths were ruled homicides. 2018, the bodies of Paul and Paris Bradley were found inside that burned vehicle. By then, the crime scene had already become something much larger than a local homicide. A father and a daughter discovered together in a burned car. A kidnapping, torture, execution-style violence, arson. This was the kind of case that pulls in every level of law enforcement attention because the violence is so extreme, and the public outrage is immediate. As investigators worked the case, the picture that emerged was one of planning, rumor, and greed. Prosecutors eventually brought a long list of charges that included aggravated murder, kidnapping, aggravated burglary, aggravated arson, murder, felonious assault, and weapons charges. In 2019, prosecutors sought the death penalty against Ronald Newberry, Cody Gibson, and DeMarcus Shealy, describing the crime in terms that reflected just how disturbing the facts were. Quentin Palmer was also charged in the broader case at one point, though he did not face death specifications. Then moved through years of court proceedings. One by one, the defendants faced trials or plea deals. In December 2021, a jury convicted Cody Gibson on multiple counts, including aggravated murder, aggravated arson, kidnapping, and aggravated burglary. In February 2022, that same jury decided against imposing the death penalty. Then, in March 2022, sentencing brought another major chapter in the case to a close. Ronald Newberry was sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility after 65 years. Cody Gibson was sentenced to life with parole eligibility after 50 years. DeMarcus Shealy pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and related charges and received a 15-year prison sentence. Those outcomes ended one part of the legal process, but they did not erase what happened in that house, what happened over those hours, or what was taken from the Bradley family forever. And that is what makes this case linger. Because when you strip away all the court filings, sentencing language, and headlines, what remains is devastatingly simple. A father was home with his daughter. Rumors about wealth turned him into a target. The people who came looking for money did not leave when they came up empty-handed. Instead, greed escalated into torture, kidnapping, murder, and fire. Paris Bradley never got to grow up. Whatever dreams she had, school, sports, adulthood, family, future, all of it was stolen in a single night of unimaginable cruelty. Paul Bradley never got the chance to protect his daughter, survive that night, or tell his side of what happened. They were both taken in a way that left a permanent scar on their loved ones and on the communities of Bedford and East Cleveland. There are cases people remember because they are mysterious. There are cases people remember because they changed the law. And then there are cases remembered because they reveal just how catastrophic a rumor can become once it mixes with greed, violence, and people willing to cross every human line imaginable. This is one of those cases. The murders of Paul and Paris Bradley remain one of the most painful reminders that sometimes the spark for extraordinary violence is not a personal vendetta or a complicated conspiracy. Sometimes it is a rumor about money, a house chosen as a target, a father and daughter trapped in the path of pure evil. And for the people who loved them, that night in October 2018 never really ended. If this case stays with you, that's because it should. Paris Bradley was only 14 years old. Paul Bradley was her father, and both were taken in one of the most brutal crimes the Cleveland area has ever seen. For more real stories told with care and respect, stay locked in. And that's the end of the video. If this video kept you locked in, make sure you like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Your support helps bring more real stories to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you're the first to know when a new story drops. We post real stories 3 times a week. Until the next one, stay locked in, real stories only. This is Story Time.